All right, before we get any further in this review, I do want to state that Meze did send this out for a review. They are not paying, asking, or otherwise trying to influence me to say anything good or bad about their headphones. All thoughts and opinions are my own. All right, thanks guys. Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about these in-ear headphones, the Meze Penta Rise. This is a pretty interesting product coming out of Meze because it has a very different sound signature than what is, in my consideration, typical for Meze. This is, of the Meze products that I have tried, probably the most neutral sounding from that brand specifically. Now I do want to make a slight correction over my first impressions. Rai actually stands for heaven in Romanian, and it's spelled R-A-I. I called it something else. I looked it up on Google. Never trust Google. Anyways, this is standing for heaven, Penta being 5, and 5 being the amount of drivers that are used in this. 4 balanced armature drivers and 1 dynamic driver, making a total of 5 drivers per earbud. So I will get into why this is such a different product than most of Meze's line in a second, but first I want to talk about the build, which is going to be this really attractive in-ear headphone. Like this thing I think is one of the best looking in-ears on the market right now. Now I'll talk more in a second about what makes this such a unique Meze product. Now first note on the build, this is an aluminum chassis and it's actually fairly lightweight. Like this is not a very heavy in-ear headphone. Now it is made of this really dark, almost black, but it's still blue. Now a couple quick notes on the build. This does not have a really sealed, super closed sound. So it leaks a little bit on the outside and it leaks a little bit coming in. Not a whole lot. I would consider it kind of a semi-closed sound. Now one benefit to this is that it actually doesn't have that weird pressure feeling. Like when you initially stick in a headphone, it kind of feels like it's a suction cup on the inside of your ear. Not a pleasant experience, but this definitely does not have that feeling. And for that, it is actually quite comfortable. But some people may prefer something a little bit more closed off. It's not a lot of leak in, especially if you're playing music. And if you pause the music, you can definitely hear what's going on around you. And depending on your circumstances, that may be a benefit or detriment. I don't mind it too much though. I think it's quite nice actually, and a pretty good departure from what is traditional in this market. Now on the ear stems, they use this triple hole system. 2 of those smaller holes are coming from the 4 balanced armature drivers, 2 per hole obviously. And then the big hole is coming from the big dynamic driver that's in there producing most of the bass frequencies. Now a quick note on the stem, it's a little bit bigger than I think I'd like it to be. On my ears, it's pretty much just at the limit of how big I would want it to be before it gets uncomfortable. I can definitely feel it in my ears, and I think if you have small ears, it's going to be a main point of fatigue and an otherwise comfortable headphone. If they could have shrunk that down a little bit, maybe made those tips come a little bit closer together in the center, or kind of mold all into one giant hole and just shrunk down the size of that, I think that would have been a big benefit to them, but they didn't. So you're dealing with something that I would consider not extra large, but on the larger size of ear stems. Now regarding the accessories that come with this, it comes with 1 standard braided cable that is kind of this clear color. It's a pretty typical cable. There's nothing really stand out about it. It is fairly lightweight and reasonably well built. You can buy aftermarket balance cables, which I do wish came with this, just given the price point. This is a very expensive earbud coming in at about $1,100. So extra cables, extra accessories, extra warranty, extra, it's always appreciated, especially with such a high asking price. But it does come with a single 3.5 millimeter braided cable. Now on the ear tips, again, pretty traditional. You have an array of ear tips. You actually have various sizes of silicone tips, a couple option for the dual layer silicone tips that have kind of the dual lip, and then a set of foam tips. So you do have some options there, not a massive amount, but some. And then it also comes with a pretty standard carry case, nothing really to write home about. So not exactly leading the industry with some crazy accessory set either. Okay, now let's talk about the sound, and this is where we start getting into the departure from traditional Meze. And I think this is going to be either seen as a step in the right direction, which I kind of see it as, or it's going to be seen as kind of a wrong and a bit of a misstep. Now, a quick disclaimer to this part, I do not consider this a neutral headphone. I just think this is the most neutral of the Meze products, which tend to be pretty warm overall headphones, especially their over-ear headphones like their Empyrean and their 99 Classic. Those are very bassy and very warm headphones. This doesn't really carry that same sound signature. So it's not neutral, it's just a little bit more neutral. So this in-ear of the Meze products I have tried has the furthest neutral sound of their product line. It is probably the least bassy Meze product that I have personally tried. And about this move and this slight departure, I do have quite a bit of thoughts, and we'll get to those as we go along here, starting of course with the treble response. So treble response is one of those areas that begins kind of an ongoing theme of slight confusion with this headphone because it can't quite seem what it wants to do. It's very present from kind of your lower end treble frequencies up until about 10K, and it's got a fair bit of detail, a fair bit of information there. Not necessarily class leading in neither of those categories, but it's what I would consider to be good, not great, but good. But then after 10K, it kind of drops off a lot and doesn't really have any of those air frequencies. And this gives it a distinctly unclinical sound when compared to more clinical headphones like the Empyre Zeus, which has a very, very active treble response all the way through. This feels characteristically slower and less refined in the top end than that headphone does, and they're coming in at about the same price. Now, another headphone here that has less lower treble but more upper treble than the Penta is going to be the B1 from Final Audio. Now that B1 I have not reviewed yet, but I really do enjoy it, and it's coming in at a lower price. Now, unfortunately, treble is one of those areas that I feel like it's a little bit uncharacteristic, but it also seems to be an area that's drawing a lot of attention to itself, especially below 10K. So you get a lot of the tempo instruments, the clicks, the hi-hats that are keeping that kind of pace that come forward and kind of shout at you quite a bit and grab your attention, but then it can't finish it off with a lot of real finite resolution after that. It can't seem to get you those crispy little details after initially grabbing your attention. Now, the treble response ultimately feels what I would consider to be smooth, not planar levels of smooth, not that still detailed and still really finite, but smooth type of planar sound that a lot of really good planars can have. But it does feel smooth in a what I would consider to be a slightly under-detailed way compared to the competition, especially being that Zeus and the B1. And I think this is one of the areas that they definitely have room for improvement here. Then, instead of talking about mid-range, I want to talk a little bit about the bass response first. So bass response here is going to be the biggest change from a lot of Meze's line. So it is not overkill, it is not a lot, it is bloated. I actually consider the bass response on here to be quite clean and quite nice and well resolving, while also reaching deep, but not having a lot of oomph. It doesn't have a lot of guts behind it. It has a lot of what I would consider to be quality and cleanliness, but doesn't quite have a super punchy feel. Now, right away, I think there's going to be two camps of people on this one. Those people thinking, thank God, like I liked everything about Meze except for that one feature. And then there's going to be some people who prefer that from Meze, that a little bit thicker, harder hitting bass response, and are going to be missing it a little bit on this headphone. Now, it does respond pretty well to EQ, and that's worth mentioning, but unfortunately, not part of the review. If we're talking about changing the sound signature drastically, then we're no longer even talking about what this headphone is when it shows up at your door. Now, what the bass actually reminds me of is the clarity and cleanliness and speed of the Zeus, but with a little bit more impact than that. Not quite as much as the B1 has for total impact, but still pretty good. But the bass response on here in this category for IEMs, I would actually consider to be like an 8 to an 8.5 for bass response. It's fairly good. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about mid-range, which is ultimately the most disappointing area, and I think it could have been the best area. So it's got a little bit of a mid-range dip in the lower mids, so there's not a lot of presence and power behind vocalists, and a little bit of a boost in the upper mid-range. Now, I said something very similar in a previous video about the Dream XLS from DACS, which I actually reviewed last week, which is very high-end $2,400 IEM. It's very expensive, and I said something similar, but the way that they go about doing this is a little bit different and results in different things. The DACS seems a little bit thin in the lower mid-range, as does this, but the upper mid-range, while being a little bit shouty, has this incredible precise center image and very good presentation. Now, it's got its flaws, but of the benefits that it has, that is the most pronounced. And the Penta here has some of that thinness, but it doesn't have the incredible precise separation from the background. And I feel like the vocalist gets a little bit lost in a field of sound, and it doesn't quite have the staging capability. Now, I'm not comparing these two headphones directly, nor expecting the Penta to compete with the DACS, given the DACS is twice as much and then some, but I'm just kind of trying to use that as the best way to explain what I mean by a dip in the lower mid-range and a boost in the upper mid-range, at least as far as vocalists go. Instruments this actually tends to be fairly nice with, but again, it lacks some of the punch and capability of a lot of mid-range instruments, so cellos don't feel as strong and vibrant and colorful as they could be. And I think one thing that's disappointing with this area is that the bass response and the treble response really set this up to be a fantastic mid-range headphone. Like if you wanted to boost the mid-range and get this heavy mid-range focus, kind of think like HD600, HD650, HD6XX type of vibes. I think this would have been a perfect candidate, and that with their new search for neutrality, I think would have been a awesome endeavor and could have really stepped this headphone up to a category in a class of its own, because as of my knowledge, there isn't anything taking that place for IEMs. If you guys have recommendations, please let me know in the comments down below. So I feel like they missed a little bit of the potential mark that they could have had here, especially with their alternate sound signature. Now, when it comes to the imaging and the soundstage, these are going to be 7 out of 10s. The imaging is good, but not class leading. The soundstage, good, but not class leading. And I don't really have much more to say about that because notably, they don't really have any distinct characteristics that make them notable in any way. They just are pretty traditional sounding imaging and soundstage capability, and they present a fairly nice job of it. Okay, so the conclusion here. I actually really appreciate the goal of what they seem to be going for. If they're going for a more neutral sound, I think that is a very admirable transition and direction for them to go as a company. I think their bassier, warmer headphones are still going to be a staple of the Meze name, and some of them, like the Empyrean, are fantastic for that. They're really great if you like that type of sound signature, but I do think that they should offer a versatility, and I think as far as their high-end stuff, definitely going with the more neutral approach is a good idea. And honestly, if there's a version 2 or the next iteration, if they fix some of the issues that this one has, particularly more resolution in the top end and a little bit more focus in the mid-range, I think that this would be a fantastic headphone if it had that. And I think the treble response specifically and the bass response, the way that it's handled right here, it sets that up perfectly. It just needs a slight retuning and a slight tweaking in the mid-range to kind of give it a little bit more guts. Now, my personal opinion, unfortunately, I find this headphone to be a little bit dull, and mostly because it doesn't really seem to be characteristic in any way. It kind of blends with everything. It doesn't really stand out. There doesn't seem to be a niche for it, and it doesn't seem to be better than everything else on the market. So it's a good IEM. I think it's a bit overpriced, and I would definitely like to see some further improvements in the future with this IEM. But I do want to give them full credit for trying a new sound signature. I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. I also want to give them full credit for building a chassis that it's exceptionally well made. And in terms of the outward appearance, I actually think it's one of the most attractive IEMs on the market today. And I want to give them full credit for that. But as an overall score, I'm going to give this thing about a 6.5 to a 7 out of 10, given the price range that it's at and some of the available competition at this price and lower. Now, I do want to give them a huge thank you for sending this out. I definitely appreciate it. Now, I want to thank my editor, Dakota, for editing this video. If you like this video and you want to see more of my face, please hit the subscribe button, hit that bell notification to get notified for new videos. Leave a comment, leave a like. I'm sure you know the drill by now if you've been on YouTube for more than 5 minutes. And until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.